and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast.
But it's a bit like meeting you. It's probably more, I feel like I know you, and it's partly from Facebook and through Noel, and then obviously the podcast as well. It's probably more sort of one way.
And we live literally, it was about, 17 miles it was to get here.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous it's taken this long to actually get
Yeah,
here.
although I've not been up here for that long. I don't have a motorbike, maybe that's why.
You don't have a motorbike now?
Yeah. You're all charlatans.
Why is that? Because you just bought a flat.
Yeah. I was living in London and I figured it was costing me £2,000 a year, and I'd used it once really.
Right.
And so I got rid of it, and that was 18 months ago. And now I'm not living in London and I haven't bought one because I'm doing a flat. But I haven't used a mountain bike that I bought. Well, hardly used it. I used it
It was kind
of
of post, I always say this the wrong way around. It was kind of pre-TET, wasn't it? And you kind of had the perfect TET bike. And you sold it just as all that kicked off, didn't you?
Was it you that had the 690
Yeah.
Adventure?
Ian,
beautiful.
Ian Womack nearly bought it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then
That's
someone
another
beat him to
podcast.
it.
Well, did we have him lined up and then he couldn't
No,
make it?
if we ever meet Ian Womack, you must not mention that we know Chris.
The bike broke down.
He'll punch us in the face. No, never got that far.
There's a story there. Maybe you don't want to tell it now.
I don't know if we're recording or not, so I don't know if I can.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. Just this bit. Isn't this one of the bits we need to edit out?
Possibly.
Okay. So anyway, we are recording,
Great.
and we have been for a couple of minutes now. At least I hope we are. So we're joined on the podcast tonight, Sunday evening in end of February, by Chris Bone, who we're talking to, is a friend of Noel's and has several other joint friends that I think you actually met in Africa on Chris's trip. Well, looking at the planning, you planned on doing a loop all the way around Africa from Yorkshire all the way through Africa, and your story is recorded on motocrossafrica.co.uk. No, why are you looking so mystified?
Oh, because I don't know. I'd
You've
forgotten
not
all
seen
about
this?
this thing. I didn't even know it existed.
Well, it was your idea to get him on the podcast.
I know, but I didn't know he'd built a website around
It's got a website and everything.
Yeah,
It's
I
got
maybe never showed you.
photos, it's got
Yeah.
videos, it's got his story.
Oh, I should have looked at this, shouldn't I?
Really?
So
Preparation, it's called.
how did you find a website?
I just did a search on Chris Bone Africa, I think, and then it kind of came up and various things came up and there it was.
Very good.
This was a while ago, wasn't it? This was in 2007.
Yeah, I left in September 2007 and got back sort of springtime 2008. So yeah, it was
Right,
6
okay.
months.
Fair old trip. We'll come on to that in a minute, but let's just back up a bit. So, who is Chris Bone and what do you do and
You have
what's
to
your
talk about him in the-
motorbiking history?
Yeah, we must talk about it, but only in the third person.
No, don't do that.
But yeah, so where were you? In what stage were you at in your life when you started thinking about it?
Yeah, so I guess I was around I'd finished uni and just started working. I'd started my first sort of professional job. So that's about 23, something like that, 22, 23. And I had a 2-year graduate scheme, and actually I was about 6 months into it, and I wasn't even that far into it. I was about 6 weeks into it. I bought a motorbike, a KTM, and I crashed it shortly after.
Was this the motocross bike?
Yes.
Right. So you were just riding on motocross tracks?
Yeah. I was living in Edinburgh at the time, and there's some places called the Bings, which are like giant anthills, sort of old quarries, and people just used to, I'm not sure how official it was, but people used to just go and ride motorbikes
In the good
there.
old days.
And I had a mate that had come up for the weekend. I had a long weekend, and we were going to go play, and yeah, I crashed it and broke some bones.
Didn't you sort of keep your bike in a box trailer there?
It did. It lived in I had to move it using a box trailer, but then it lived in one of these safe store places. Yeah.
I just thought it lived in a box trailer that stayed there, and then somebody broke into the box trailer.
No. When I crashed it, we had to leave it there because obviously I buggered my arms and I couldn't drive. Can I say that?
Yeah. So what you fucking want?
So yeah, I couldn't drive. So we ended up, we put the bikes away, or my mate put the bikes away. We went in his car with his trailer on bike back to my house, had some food, then went and found the hospital because in Edinburgh you can't find it. I'd not been before. And by the time all this happened, it was late in the day. It was dark. Oh, actually, we got a taxi back to this place so that he could then drive my car home. And there was a barrier down, so we couldn't get in. So anyway, we got back the next day and the car had been trashed, like stereo, all the windows through, just like wipers off, mirrors off. It had, I think they must have thought it was petrol. They'd poured it all over, and the inside of the car was just water. And they tried to break in the trailer. But anyway, but this gave me a load of time off, during which time I started planning the Africa trip.
Right. So what do you do work-wise?
At the time,
That gives you that level of flexibility.
Well, I was working for a bank at the time, but I was on a 2-year graduate scheme, and so my plan was just to keep working for another 18 months or so and then go off and do this, and then come back and look for a job.
And what gave you the idea of going to Africa?
I had been to Africa before. I went to South Africa when I was about 18 for a summer, but I just thought I had a KTM. I liked being off-road, and I just thought it'd be like a giant dirt track. Just thought it'd be cool.
But had you sort of followed other people's journeys doing it?
Not that I remember. I did find when you start doing the planning, and I did do a lot of planning, you find Horizons Unlimited, and you see that people have done it. But I don't think, obviously GoPros weren't around at the time, and I knew people had done it. And I'd actually seen some of Austin Vince's films, and I had seen Long Way Round, but these were all sort of years before.
Yeah, Ewan and Charlie are brilliant, aren't they?
Amazing, yes.
See? I like them. I think they did wonders for the adventure motorbike world.
Yeah, I was going to say you should edit in a swear box sort of clinking sound twice already into this podcast.
They hadn't done Long Way Down. I think they did Long Way Down about 6 months before I left, and it came out because I watched it the night we got back. I watched it.
But you don't remember a particular moment where you thought, I could ride a bike down to Africa?
I think it was more of an evolution. Like, my parents lived in the Middle East when I'd lived out there for a while, and then one year my dad and I had driven back from the Middle East as well in a 4x4. So I'd had motorbikes before, I'd travelled before, done some overlanding before, and I think it was never like let's do this. I think it was more of an evolution thing.
So at this stage, were you thinking, I need to find someone to do it with?
Yeah, so my mate, it was a mate from school. I was going to say his name, but I shan't. That was up for this weekend in Edinburgh. He was meant to do it with me.
Are you still friends?
I haven't spoken to him since 2007.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he didn't turn up pretty much.
Right.
Which obviously...
Well, there's more to it than that in a way,
yeah,
isn't there?
There is.
There was go on.
He'd bought the same bike as me. He
had every intention of doing the two of you doing the trip together.
We'd planned it together. I'd done a lot of the sort of legwork, but I just thought I'm more organised, and the intention, as far as I knew, we were both going. He'd bought the same bike. He was meant to have modified it sort of similarly, and yeah, we were going. And that had been a plan for 18 months. And then it was literally, it was the day I was moving out of my flat in Edinburgh, and I must have been chucking stuff in a van and taking it down to my mum's. I thought I hadn't spoke to Ryan for a couple of weeks, begging him a call. And he lived in the middle of nowhere. You couldn't quite often get him on mobile. So I got, his mum answered the landline, and I said, just checking he's got his carnet ready and he's all ready to go. And she said, yeah. And she said he's got his bike ready for DHL to Morocco. DHLing, that's for parcels. I was like, what do you mean? So anyway, she said, hasn't he told you he got done for drink driving a couple of weeks ago? He's lost his license. He's still planning on going. Apparently he was getting his bike DHL'd. I don't know. Maybe she's using the wrong term, but DHL'd to Morocco. And she was like, so then I was like, first 10 days are by myself through Europe. Then he's going to meet me, and then we're going to go through Africa together. So fine, still doing it. And I left, and then he stopped returning my calls when I was...
So how close a friend was he? Because I've got a friend that's like that, lives in the middle of nowhere, never returns your phone calls, never has his mobile phone switched on. And is always late.
It's not that I don't have it switched on. I just don't have it with me. It is switched on. It's just not with me. So the bike you chose, and so you both at this stage, you thought you'd both bought CCMs.
We had the same bike. Yeah.
So he had bought a bike.
Yeah, he had it. Yeah. I mean, he'd had bikes obviously anyway, and he'd sold his. He had a Suzuki, and he'd sold his Suzuki and bought the CCM.
So why did you buy a CCM?
Yeah. So
I'm still intrigued. You never found out why he didn't turn up.
Oh, I think the real story was he got his first proper girlfriend. And then in the end, he went travelling with her. About 6 months later, they went off to Australia and New Zealand and stuff.
I think it's a slightly disappointing story, really.
Yeah.
I like the drink driving, probably got done for murder, went in.
There's kind of more to it than that, though. And this is why I I think I remember this part of the story, because you were kind of strung along, weren't you, for quite a long time. It wasn't as if you found out he wasn't going when you were setting off.
He never
from
told
home.
me he wasn't coming.
But I thought he sort of kept saying, I'll be there. I'll catch you up. I'll be there. And you were well down into Morocco.
Yeah, I was in Morocco, and I hung around for 2 weeks in Morocco. And he was saying, I'm sort of, it was hard to get hold of him. And then it was always like, it's been delayed because of, I can't remember, his bike had broken down. He said so it had taken a few days to get it sorted and stuff like this. And he never told me he wasn't coming. In the end, he was like, I got hold of him one day and he said, I can't talk right now. I'm at my girlfriend's. I was like, that's great, but I'm in Morocco.
Oh my God.
And I said, well, then you better walk home and give me a call back. And he never called me back. And that was the last time I spoke to him.
Wow. And was he a really close friend before then?
I thought he was.
Wow. That's interesting. I wonder if he's listening to this.
No one listens to this.
No, that's true, actually. If you're listening to this, give us a shout.
So what made you choose a CCM bike?
Yeah, so
because even then that would be quite an unusual choice, wasn't it?
A lot of it, yeah, it was very unusual. It was before they bought out whatever they called that 400 bike that was meant for overlanding. But it was, first and foremost, cheap. It was cheap, and also it looked good on paper in terms of had WP suspension off the KTMs, had Suzuki DRZ engine, so reliable engine, had steel frame, so in theory could be fixed. It was lightweight, and as I say, it was cheap. Like I picked it up for, I think it was $2,000. I paid something like that. And then that also has other benefits, like at the time, because as you mentioned, I was planning on doing a loop and coming back up to Egypt, and your carnet is sort of a tax document for the bike. So it's a little bit like a passport for the bike for tax reasons. And you have to put down a deposit based on what countries you're going to and the tax that they charge and the value of the bike. And Egypt is, you're meant to put down sort of, or have insurance for 8 times the value of the bike.
Wow.
So like even at $2,000, that would have been a lot. So I think I said it was worth £500. And then again, because it was a CCM, no one's really going to turn around and go, actually, I know what a CCM's worth.
What's worth £500 at the end of the trip?
Probably not even. I think it's sold for around about that, yeah.
Right. So you said you did a lot of planning. You bought yourself a fairly cheap bike. Did you have it, and you were, not still a student effectively, I guess?
I'd been working for 2 years, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of budget did you have? Or?
Yeah, budget's a difficult one because it depends, sort of being a bit boring, but how you account for it. Like you're going to eat whether you're here or there, and you include eating, and the real rough figures. I tried to save for, I did a 2-year program and I tried to save for 18 months of that. And really the savings sort of bought me the bike and the gear. It didn't really put a lot of cash in the bank. So I took out a loan just before I went to spend whilst I was away.
So I think this is a really interesting part of this, because this is always a mystery, isn't it? When people say that they did this round the world trip, and there's that annoying thing when people say, "Oh, just do it. Don't think about it. Just that's fine for you."
It's really interesting because that really pisses me off actually. Because it's like, well,
what they don't tell you is their circumstances that they were given a house that they're renting out, or
exactly.
There's always some little thing. Really.
Yeah, like you've got loads of fucking money in the bank, whereas I've got 3 children and a mortgage,
So
and a wife that set up a business to support.
So your approach was really interesting, wasn't it? Because you pretty much, I've never heard anyone else say that they've done this. You borrowed money.
Yeah, I took a loan because I was going and I was committed to going. I thought I could save, as I say, like I just couldn't save what I thought and put money in the bank, but I was going. So yeah, I took a loan. It was meant to be I borrowed £10,000 over 3 years. I had to pay back 12 grand. So including the interest, so 2 grand's worth of interest. So of the 10 grand that I got put in my bank, 4 grand of that was the first year's worth of repayments. So that went straight away. Well, basically that just sat in my bank account to pay itself back. So I really sort of net got 6 grand of cash to spend.
Wow.
It's good, isn't it? He
works in finance.
Yeah, it's great, yeah.
Or used to.
Well, he doesn't anymore because he was using the loan to pay back his loan over 6 months, and then he had to get a job to pay the rest of it off, presumably.
Yeah, that's it. So when I came back, I had 2 years worth of loan repayments of a few £100 a month. So yeah, I just chipped away at it then.
Not so scary, is it, really?
No, it's fine. And people sort of, you quit work for various reasons, and people are always like, oh, that's a really brave thing to do. But I'd like to think you're employable. You're going to get a job doing something. You don't necessarily know maybe where it's going to be or who it'll be for or what it'll be at, but you're going to get a job. Fingers crossed, touch wood.
Well, I think that's you did it at the right time when you don't have the mortgage, you don't have the children, you don't have, other responsibilities. But yeah, for somebody like me to go off and do for 6 months is, I suppose, you just got to save money, haven't you, really? But then whether I'd want to leave my family, I would actually.
Would they want you to go?
Yeah. No, my wife wouldn't mind. I think the youngest kid probably would, but the rest of them probably wouldn't even notice.
Oh.
Were there any other bikes in the running?
I liked. I looked at it would have been out of budget in reality, but the BMW 650. I'm trying to think what it was at the time, but that sort of thing, the single engine. But it's the best part, 200 kilos still. And to be honest, it was just out of budget. And I wasn't old enough to test ride it. I think you had to be 25 or something. So when they wouldn't let me test ride it, I was like, well, fine, KTM will. KTM lent me a 640, they were at the time. They lent me a 640 for the weekend. It's a great bike. I really loved it. If I could have taken them on, I probably would have, but they had real reputation for being unreliable at the time.
Right.
But actually, we met 3 South African guys on KTMs, and I was a bit envious.
This was the 640. It was adventure style, wasn't it?
Adventure.
Big tanks and fairing. It's a nice looking bike.
It was the nearest sort of overland bike at the time. The only thing people said was sort of watch through it. But these 3 South Africans, like I say, doing a similar trip, similar time, and they didn't have any issues.
Yeah. I still don't know why KTM haven't actually done that bike again. I bought that new 700 one out, or 790 or whatever it is, but it's huge, isn't it? I just don't get it. Don't get their thinking.
Well, the 6, I ended up, I just sold it 18 months ago, but I ended up with the 690, and obviously Rally Raid do the kit for that. And then I think that's a nice bike.
Yeah, that's a big chunk of cash as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So you set off.
Yes.
Now, unusually, you decide to go down the western side rather than the well-trodden eastern side. What set you off down that side?
I literally can't remember.
You didn't do it because it was more adventurous or harder, or
it's possible that it was
more
longer.
war zones to ride through.
I literally can't remember. I'm not sure why it was.
Did you look at a map before you went?
Yeah, I had the 3. There's 3 Michelin maps cover the entire continent, and they're pretty decent maps. That's all you need.
Really? It literally was just follow the.
Yeah, there's one for the Southern Africa, one for Northwest, and one for Northeast.
Right. And did you look at the Foreign Office site for recommendations to places you can or shouldn't go to?
And obviously, they recommend you don't go to most of them, and they tell you absolutely don't go to these, and if you injure yourself or you're in trouble, you're by yourself. But it's, but it's, you got to go through them if you want to get to the bottom.
Yeah.
So
exactly,
you go through them.
Yeah, and you didn't think twice about doing that, really?
It's not that you don't think twice. I wouldn't say... I don't think I was blasé about it. You're taking some risks when you do a trip like that. It's hard to exactly know what the risks are, but you're riding a motorbike for starters. That's probably the biggest risk in reality. I mean, you do that whether you ride that here in the UK or somewhere else.
And what visa preparations do you have to make?
Yeah, so visas, I was able to get a few in advance, but quite often you have to use them within, say, 6 weeks or 2 months or something. So then the rest of the visas you buy whilst you're on the road.
So when you set off, what did you have visas for?
I was testing my memory. I had a couple of countries that were sort of northern Africa, so maybe around, I don't know.
So where did you set off from on day one? Where did you?
Yorkshire. Well, I'd been living in Scotland. I went to my mum's in Lancaster, and then we'll sail from North Yorkshire, settle. I was at school near there. And so was my mate that was meant to come with me, and he didn't turn up on the day, and my mum said he's not coming, is he?
Did you? Was it right down to the wire? Did you think he might be turning up on that day?
I was half. He hadn't said he was coming, and I was half hoping he would turn up. I think I was in denial. Yeah.
But you still set off on your own, which was quite brave. I mean, we have this discussion quite a lot because Noel is quite happy to go off.
I would have breathed a huge sigh of relief if you hadn't turned up.
I'm sure you would, but obviously you ended up travelling most of your trip with other people anyway. But
so from York you ride to
just set off down, and I had a ferry booked, I think, because I rode through London down to whatever port it was and jumped on the ferry, and I wanted to do as much overland as possible, so I got the shortest ferry route across to north of France, whatever port it was. Is that Calais?
Yeah, and then ride to where?
Well, just south. I went down through France over to Spain, just made my own way. It wasn't Algeciras, I don't think. It was just next to Algeciras.
Yeah.
I got the ferry over.
What kind of pace did you set from day one? Were you trying to get there as quickly as possible, or did you really take your time?
Probably in between. I think Europe felt a bit like, let's get through it and get to Africa, but I wasn't rushing. Yeah. I think it was 7 days, 10 days to go through Europe, which on that sort of bike, I don't know. And to be honest, it's like every day when you're on the trip, you get up, you pack your tent away, you ride, and as it starts getting later in the day, you do the opposite. So yeah, you're not rushing, but at the same time, you are spending all day pretty much riding or
you took a fairly direct route across France, across Spain.
I did. It wasn't really planned, and I ended up going in Spain. I came in at northeast Spain, and I just went south, and I went through some not very main places, and it was all very Spanish. Like, there wasn't English speaking people and things around.
And when you got to Morocco, was that the first time you'd been to Morocco?
I'd been to possibly. I think.
And even though you were quite well travelled, once you got to Morocco, was that your first feeling of it being?
Well, Morocco's obviously sort of Arab influence, and then I was in the Middle East, so it wasn't completely bizarre. No pun intended.
Yes, I get it. Bizarre, yes. That's what they call the markets, isn't it?
Yeah. It was nice. Morocco's
hilarious.
lovely.
No, carry on. You're fucking killing it.
Morocco was nice. It's a lovely place. I've been back a few times and doing motorbike things. I know you have too. Yeah. And it's not too far away from the UK. It's not too expensive. You get nice food, but it does feel it's not Europe. You feel it's not Europe.
And no, absolutely. That's what we've talked about Morocco at length, haven't we?
And you've still not met anyone else on bikes travelling at that stage?
No. So that was a bit later on. So I was in Mauritania trying to get a visa for Mali. So I was at the Mali embassy in Mauritania, and I bumped into so it was like Morocco, then Western Sahara, and then Mauritania. So I was in Mauritania and bumped into Dan and Ed. Well, I bumped into Ed was in the embassy. Dan wasn't, because they'd gone for a visa and he'd forgotten his passport. And I don't think I'm allowed to mention that on here. So yeah, and I'd met Dan and Ed once before, a Horizons Unlimited event down in Derbyshire, and I knew they were doing a similar trip at a similar time, albeit on bigger bikes. They had Africa Twins, the old Africa Twins.
Yeah. I'm trying to think now, when we were at the National Motorbike Museum in Birmingham, we'd sort of been round, and then we went into the shop before we left, and there was a sort of CCM book on the shelf, story of CCM, and we're flicking through it, and they'd obviously heard that Chris had done this trip on a CCM, and he's in this story of CCM book, which was quite interesting.
Awesome.
Dan and Ed, who you met, who we now all know just through mutual friends and stuff, were they in a publication of some sort in the same shop, coincidentally?
I don't know.
I think they were.
I'm sure they were. They had a blog and many things. They did a thing for Riders for Health. They were doing it for charity, if it was that. But I don't know what they were in there.
But anyway, so Dan and Ed, we declare that Dan and Ed are our sort of mutual friends. You know Dan and Ed.
I know Dan and Ed, but how...
And they're a bit like Posh and Bex. You can't mention one without the other.
No, it's true. It's true. I've never seen them apart either, actually. It's like, I don't know which one's which. But you know, you met them in Africa. How did you meet them, or did you meet them through?
Because I met somebody travelling in the Pyrenees who was travelling, who later then, or before that, I can't remember which came first, this is Neil Gonzalez, and Neil had travelled through Africa, and Neil met Chris on the same trip. This is very confusing if you don't know all these people. But
I'm interested.
But it's just this different group they've all just met through travelling on motorcycles.
And then the guy that we met on the first day of our tech trip last summer
Yeah.
knew them as well, didn't he?
That's right. Yes, everyone knows everyone.
Dutch guy.
Yeah.
Small world.
So you meet Dan and Ed, some blokes from the Midlands, and then did you stay with Dan and Ed for quite a while?
Yeah, Dan, Ed, and I travelled together for sort of the half of Africa, really. So I'd done the first, say, quarter of Africa by myself. We went our separate ways in northern Namibia. So all the sort of nitty-gritty stuff in the middle we did together.
And how did it feel having ridden that distance by yourself and then meeting up with other people?
Yeah.
Was it nice having the security of riding in a group?
Yeah, I think so. Relief was probably the right answer. And they did look after me a bit. Like I was 5 years younger than them, and they were a team. They knew what they were doing, and half the time I'd just ride along in the middle. And they had GPSs. I didn't have GPS. They were like, "This is where we're going." They had it all planned out. They were like, when I met them, they were like, "We're going to go to Senegal and Gambia." I was like, "Oh, I wasn't going to go there, but yeah, that's fine. Let's do that." So to be honest, I just tagged along with them.
But and did you enjoy it more when you were travelling with other people?
I was glad to travel with them, and obviously they're good guys. But you do travel, I wouldn't say one's better or worse for me, but they are different. Like I did enjoy, you meet more people when you're traveling by yourself, and it is a bit cheesy and everyone says it, but you do. And so it was nice to travel with them, but then it was nice to go off and do my own thing a bit at the end. Like I went over to Victoria Falls and stuff, and they just headed south to South Africa. So yeah, that was nice.
I was once trawling YouTube and came across this bit of film of this guy riding along, and then at the last minute seeing a barrier across the track in front of him, and he slid onto the ground and almost slid under. Did he slide under the barrier? I can't remember.
I hit my shoulder.
But it turns out it was Chris. I finally found out later that this was Chris's film.
So I read the story today. I've been getting a little bit excited between the two. You're in no man's land, weren't you? In between two borders.
Yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten actually, so I'm smiling. It was between we'd left DRC, and we were in, as you say, no man's land. We hadn't yet checked into Congo. So we were riding along, and the day before, it must have been January the 1st or 2nd, because we'd got sort of stuck at the border because they'd closed it for New Year. So this is a long story now, isn't it?
It's fine.
Dan and I
in no rush.
Dan and Ed had gone to a capital in whatever country we were in to try and pick up some spare parts. And so I'd gone off. We were in Gabon at the time. So I'd gone off for a few days by myself. And I was riding to meet up with them at a campsite. And I came round the corner, and there was the 3 South Africans I mentioned before. They were on KTMs, just parked up having a cup of tea at the side of the road. And we didn't know they were around or on the road. So that's the first time we bumped into them. I was like, "Oh, come with us. I know a campsite." And there's a couple of guys down the road as well. So then there was 6 of us. We then got stuck at that campsite that night because the border was closed. So we had a day off and then travelling again. So 6 of us, I was out in front. Just it was a straight dirt road. It was going uphill. I thought you could see everything. And I had like I said, there wasn't GoPros, so I had this contraption set up. So I was recording.
One of your several video cameras on this trip.
Yeah, that's it. I went through a few. But it's better to have them out and break them than not, I'd like to think. And yeah, I just didn't see. There was a piece of scaffolding bar basically across the road. It wasn't painted, obviously, no signs or anything. And it was just at head height. So I saw it when I was about 5 meters away from it. And I was standing on the pegs at the time. I had to just feet off the pegs, sort of bend down at the same time, and managed to scrape under it. I think literally the mirrors of the bike hit the scaffolding bar, my shoulder caught it, and ended up in the hedge at the side on the right hand side. And I was standing there sort of a bit bewildered thinking, what just happened? And then there's all these huts lined on the right, and then they suddenly realised that someone was around. So this was all the border guards. So they all pulled their guns and stuff and came running down.
So they thought you were charging the...
Yeah, they thought I was to sort of no good. So I'm still sort of getting over the shock of this, and they all come running out with guns pointed, obviously not very happy. So yeah, I was a bit panicked by that.
Was it still buried on YouTube, that film?
It must be. I'd forgotten or didn't know that you found it.
It would be titled or anything.
I wonder if it's on the website.
Probably.
You put it on your website on motocrossafrica.co.uk.
Is it on?
I don't know. I didn't watch all the videos.
I don't think it is.
Just 12 years ago, the quality was pretty awful.
Yeah, it was. It was all stuff that I put up before I went. Oh no, actually, that's not true. I don't think it's on there. Is the answer?
Right.
No.
If we find it, we'll put it on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
So did Africa live up to its scary, dangerous reputation?
Yes and no. We had some dodgy moments. Obviously, that was like my own silly fault, really, the barrier thing. We did get sort of stopped once or twice, and you get hassles and people try and get money out of you. But 99% of people that you meet, probably more in reality, are nice and friendly or inquisitive. And yeah, you do see like a properly different continent, which is nice.
I was intrigued by the... you called them amateur bandits that you got held up by in Congo.
So I was with Dan and Ed at the time. I was being babysat in the middle, and we came around this corner. From memory, it was tarmac, and it was just a lovely sweeping road around to the right. And as you come around, obviously this is like the road, like you can't get any other way south to the next country. So you come around this road, and they chopped a tree down across the road, and there was almost sort of a dirt lay-by, for want of a better word, on the right-hand side, and there was about 20 youths, something like that, around with sort of machetes, and a few of them had guns and stuff. We got a bit of hassle. I tried to just ignore them and left the engine of the bike running, and I think they weren't expecting us, and they almost got bored or didn't know what to do with us. Like 3 Westerners, I think they were expecting a minibus of locals or something to come round.
Right.
And I think maybe they were scared to do something to us because they didn't know who we were.
The consequences would have been more severe, potentially, if they'd held up some tourists, I guess.
And if they do take like the bikes and stuff, I mean, I'm sure they could have a lot of fun on them, but what are they actually going to do? Like, you can't get spares and parts and stuff, and they're pretty obvious and not very discreet.
Right.
So yeah, we did get a bit of hassle, and
So
it was pretty scary.
Did you ride away from that situation?
I just kept my head down, kept staring straight ahead, like I say, and the bike was in gear, ready to go. I pretty much ignored them. So they went to Dan and Ed, and I think Ed was trying to speak some French to them. And I don't know, I felt that I engaged less with them, and they left me alone more. And in the end, they did just sort of get bored, for want of a better word, or not know what to do, and they waved us on, and I think we went round the tree trunk.
Gosh, that sounds quite scary there.
It was scary at the time, but again, in reality, nothing happened. So you don't know how close you were or not, but it was fine.
So the other good story on the website is the drunk immigration officials.
Yeah,
that's the chief is.
Yeah, we'd gone. It'd been a hell of a day actually. We were in Angola. Ed had been riding behind me, and he was trying to keep out my dust. So like you kick up, say, a triangle of dust behind you. So he was riding to my right hand side, sort of not alongside but behind, keeping out the dust. And anyway, it had a crash with this local, and it hadn't been great.
He crashed into a local, or
yeah, there was 2 kids, basically, like boys on a scooter riding along, and they saw me coming, and so they started going to the right to move out of my way, and I went past them. But as they were turning right, they hadn't seen Ed, who was riding along on my right, and pretty much Ed and them collided. You know, they were riding along in flip-flops, no helmets, and yeah, and so they had a collision. At first, it was just dust everywhere, but I knew obviously something had happened. So once it started to clear, like, Ed was sort of staggering around. One of the locals was all right, and the other one, his foot was pretty mashed at the back. Obviously, like I say, flip-flops or bare feet. So I got my first aid kit out, and yeah, he got some bandages on him. Ed was a bit bruised, as I say, sort of a bit dazed and confused. We tried to flag down a car that went by, and it wouldn't stop for us. But then the second one we did get to stop. So we got this guy in the back of a pickup, and then suddenly, like, people just emerge in Africa. No one's around, and then people start emerging. So people all start coming out, and it starts feeling a bit hostile. Mm-hmm. So like, Dan had been out in front, and so Dan was just off. So it's just Ed and I was like, Ed, we need to get out of here. So sort of helped Ed back up with his bike, and we just basically got on the bikes and started riding on because we were a bit worried. And the guy had gone on the truck as well, so we were following the truck. We came to a checkpoint sort of 5 miles down the road or something, and Ned already knew what had happened, so they'd sort of stopped us. And because it's Angola, they speak Portuguese, and so there was quite a language barrier. In the end, sort of Ed went and got checked up in a hospital. They happened to have a hospital in this place where we got stopped, which is like 5 miles down the road. Ed got checked over, and they checked his licenses and stuff like this, and saw they had stuff. Obviously, these kids didn't have anything. And the kid was in there getting stitched up. So basically, sort of, he got checked up and did his official stuff, and then we got out there as quick as possible. By this time, it's dark. I didn't have lights on the bike, so I was riding in the wake of Dan or Ed again, trying to use his headlight. And we got to this village. It was just off the border, I think. We were trying to be ready to go over the border the next day because we just wanted out of there in case anything sort of came up about this. And yeah, Ed and I went to try and get some food, and there was a drunken immigration officer. He was interested in, I think, money and women and give us another hard time, and he just gave us hassle. In the end, he took Ed's passport off him, and he was trying to fine us left, right and centre. And then at one point, he flagged a car down and he tried to get us to get in this car, and we were refusing. And there's, again, a mob had sort of formed around us, and half of them were trying to bundle us into this car, and half of them were like, no, you need to not get in there because you'll be in trouble if you do. And then this like almost kid comes along and is like, run. So Ed and I are like, suddenly like there's a bit of a gap parts in this sort of mob of people, and someone shouts, run. So we ran. So ended up like scrambling down the back of sort of where these houses and huts and stuff were. And then we sort of got away from people, and then we turned to each other and we were like, well, where are we running to? Like, what are we going to do now? So we're like, this guy's going to be even more pissed off now. So we decided to just sort of casually walk back around into the square where he'd been sat and just play it cool. And again, it was just a game of patience in the end. And like, it took about 3 hours out of our evening when we were knackered and hungry. But he got bored in the end, and we didn't give him any money, and he gave Ed's passport back. He's just been an arse, really.
So both these incidents happened in Angola.
Yeah.
And riding down through, when was the first time what sort of roads were you riding on? Were you on tarmac most of the time? Most
of them were tarmac, actually, which was almost slightly disappointing for me. Probably time-wise, you might be a bit nearer 50-50. I suspect it was more like sort of 30-70, like 30% off-road time-wise. But distance-wise, you're probably like 90% on-road. And again, going back to Angola, it was funny because it had money spent on it, and it had really nice roads, and then they'd just been left to deteriorate, and the potholes there were terrible. So it's actually like worse and more dangerous than if it was just a gravel road. You could sort of keep momentum. Be it Angola, you'd build up confidence, build up a bit of speed, and then like a mile later you just hit this huge, like there's just potholes everywhere. You just really hit them like proper, put dents in your rims sort of stuff. Angola was worse.
And are you finding accommodation most days at this stage?
Yeah, we'd slept in tents 95% of the time, but what you would normally do is you'd know there was a village there, and you'd head for the village, and quite often you'd find sort of a hotel, it'd be called, which would be a bed you wouldn't want to sleep in, and you'd just pay them to like camp in their car park or something, so you were behind a wall, which is a little bit for security, but it's for privacy as much as anything, because otherwise people come out. And we did a few wild camps, but not actually that many. I wish we'd done more.
And how did you use money? Were you carrying much money with you?
No, I did start off with like $500 or something. No one was using dollars. Just take an ATM card. This was like 11 years ago, and you take your cash card and you get money out. At the border crossing or at the first town, you take local currency out.
So this is one thing that I'm quite interested in, because obviously I've been to Morocco a number of times. I've been to South Africa, but I've never been outside of those two fairly touristy countries. And I'm guessing a lot of people that listen to this haven't been either. So I was just, some of the questions I've got written down are about, what do you eat? Where do you get cash from? Is clean water plentiful? Fuel? All those kind of things. Is it massively different to travelling through Europe?
Probably not, no. Especially the west of Africa was old French colonies in general, and so it was baguettes. We had a lot of baguettes. We had a lot of pasta, occasionally sort of tins of corned beef, or the vache qui rit, laughing cow cheese, some Primula sort of stuff.
Really?
Yeah. Pasta in an evening, you just put it on the pan.
It's not difficult to find
There's always a little shack somewhere, like they sell mobile. This is, like I say, 11 years ago, so it'll be even more so now, but everywhere sells like a shack with a mobile, and sell Omo washing powder and your SIM card and a bit of food and cans of drink if you want them.
So you've taken all the camping equipment. You've got everything you would need to be.
Yeah, we took tents and thermarests.
And was there any stage that you felt overpacked?
No, That's one thing. If someone is looking at doing a trip like that, so I would definitely go soft luggage if you're doing any off-road at all. People who go hard luggage say for security, and it just never was an issue. I'd say definitely go soft luggage. It's lighter. You save about 10 kilos before, like the hard panniers are about 10 kilos before you put anything in them. My weight in total was 30 kilos, including the luggage.
Wow.
And the top box weighed a few kilos because it was one of these low pro, or there's another petty case. It was the same sort of thing. It was one of those which was waterproof, and I could lock it, so that did have my passport and stuff in.
Is that fixed to the bike, or could you take it off?
You could take it off, but again, the padlock fastened it on. So sorry, I say not to worry about security, but I was locking my passport away. But the side panniers were both they were a brand called Andy Straps, and I think
Australian,
yeah. What's Mr. Walter Colbatch? He designed some, I think, for Dave Lomax. What's his?
Oh yeah, for Adventure Spec.
I think it's for Adventure Spec. They had some very similar ones, or they look similar to me. I never saw some. But yeah, just soft panniers. They're cheaper, like they're 100 or 200 quid. Lightweight. If you have when you have falls, they don't like get damaged and rip apart. They're fine. So
you never had that sort of classic situation of being a week in and thinking, I don't need any of this stuff. I should just
no. So that was, I guess, when I was in my flat in Edinburgh. Whenever I bought something new, which was normally like an eBay order over this 18 months, I'd have these panniers out and I would put that thing in them. And then, there's no point buying a load of stuff and then trying to pack the day before you go. Like, everything was like, is it going to go in this bag or not? And how much does it weigh?
And did you have a little shakedown trip somewhere before you set off?
That was a plan, but it never really happened. I went camping from London, and I camped in someone's back garden because I couldn't find anywhere to camp. So I managed to. Someone had a really long back garden with trees along the way, and it had gone dark by this stage. And I went basically sort of through the fence and camped in the back garden and left in the morning. I think I probably woke them up when I started the bike and rode out.
Perfect. So reading your blog, you seem to have quite a good attitude to travelling, because you seem to take quite a few days out when you weren't riding. Certainly in the beginning, you seem to spend a lot of time lazing by the pools in Morocco. So, and the thing that I struggle with is having that kind of, right, I'm going to South Africa and making progress every day. But you seem to actually have a more relaxed attitude to progress than I'm worried I would have.
Morocco, I chilled out for 2 weeks thinking that my mate Ryan, who shall not be named.
I just said his name then. You
I'm thinking he might turn up. So I was literally chilling in a pool for a bit of that. I'd say we didn't really chill in general, but you'd take about 2 days a week off riding, and that would be because you would have maintenance to do on the bikes. You would have things like you'd need to go and find a new video camera. You'd have visas, and normally it was rotating around visas. Like, you'd know you were going to a capital, you had to get your application in on such and such a day, you'd get it back a day or two later, and so you'd get the visa in, then you'd do your maintenance and stuff whilst you're waiting for that to come through.
So you say you needed a visa. Is that from the travel website you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think you can get it all off. Was it
Horizons
TCO?
Unlimited,
Oh, Horizons is the best resource. That the people who have done overland adventures will be on Horizons, and there's people that are really keen to answer questions. I've not been on it for 10 years or so, but it's good.
So you basically you would know that to get a visa to go from DRC to Angola or wherever, you need to go to such and such a city, queue up for 4 hours.
Yeah, you can do your research on Horizons and things like that, but most of it is probably listed in, like I say, the Foreign Office and stuff like that. Probably you know which ones you need visas for. You can find that out before you leave the UK, and then it's just almost on the road you hear where you need to get things as well. And yeah, I can't remember exactly how we figured them all out, but yeah. But going back to money, the thing that was really expensive, and it's almost a fixed cost, so you could take twice as long, and obviously you'd only you'd maybe spend 10 or 20% more on your food, but petrol is pretty much a fixed cost because you're going that distance anyway, no matter how quickly. And visas is the other one. Like, on average, 50 quid a visa, something like that. And that was back then. So like, if we went through, say I needed 20 visas at 50 quid a pop, there's a grand of it, of my 6 grand that went pretty quick.
Did you have a sort of set amount of money that you thought you could spend each day, or did you not really need to do that?
I think so, but you can't you can't spend more or less, really. You're riding along and you're low on fuel, you buy fuel. You need to go to the next country. And
But you didn't have a figure in your head where you thought, I mustn't spend more than this each day, otherwise I'm in trouble.
No, because it wasn't like we were going out and buying things. We weren't consuming in the materialistic sense. You're just buying your daily essentials. But that ties into, at the beginning, Clive had said I was planning on doing a loop. And partly because my mate didn't turn up. Partly I was getting tired, my gear was getting tired, the bike was getting tired, but the real swing factor was money. Like, I checked my bank balance one time in Nigeria, and yeah, it had taken a big hit. And I was like, well, I'll just go to South Africa and come back then. So and I was fine with that.
Yeah, so you did have the big loop in mind, and then basically you got down to South Africa. And
yeah, the loop had been the plan. And in a way, you said about the West, I'm glad I did the longer half, and the sort of was potentially the more interesting half.
Was there a watershed moment where you kind of had enough of travelling a little bit?
I decided the day I checked my bank balance. It was probably my thoughts were perhaps going that way anyway. And when Ryan didn't turn up, I was like, I'm going to take it day by day and see what happens. And then I'd ended up traveling with Dan and Ed, and they were just going to South Africa, so that was their plan. And we met maybe about 6 other people on the road. Like, everyone that was doing it that year basically was 9 or 10 people, because you have to leave at the same time and you're basically going down the same roads. So you hear about each other and you bump into each other.
So I think you mentioned there was like a season for travelling. Is that to avoid the rains, or how?
I think it was weather, like not being too hot and some of the seasons and stuff. So yeah, if you're going to South Africa down the west coast, you leave basically in September. Everyone left within about 3 or 4 weeks of each other.
So you also mentioned the bikes took a fair pounding.
Yeah.
How did the CCM hold up?
I think it did pretty well. There was no major emergencies or issues with it. All the bikes would have had issues or did have issues.
Dan and Ed were on Transalps.
They were on Africa Twins, the old Africa Twins. Yeah. So they'd had some of the later ones, because they'd stopped making them by the time we left already, I think, by a number of years. I think they had one that was about 4 years old and one about 6 years old, something like that. So yeah, they'd taken a different approach. They had to my mind, big heavy bikes, and they had hard luggage, and they did have stuff that they didn't use. I think we got to South Africa and Ed pulled out this huge tarpaulin, like a marquee sort of thing. I was like, where do you get that from? It's like the bike. I've been traveling with him for months by this stage, and he'd had it on his bike all the time and is in a bag on top and never used it. Yeah.
He's probably still got it now.
And was your CCM a dual start bike?
Yeah, it was electric start. No, sorry, it was just electric. You could actually, for the Suzuki DRZ engine, you could get, I think, a kickstart retrofit, but I never did.
And you never had any issue where you came to the bike and pressed the button and nothing happened?
I don't think so, no. I did have some issues. Like, I had cracks in the rim of the wheel, both front and back, I think, and I noticed these one day. So I think it was my sister kindly arranged to get some shipped out, DHL'd out to whatever country it was. I can't remember.
How does that work then? You get shipped to a DHL depot and pick them up from there in the next town you go into?
Normally, like the big city is in like the next capital city in the next country, and you just get them sent there and they'll be there. Maybe you end up hanging around for a day or two. Dan and Ed got some tyres flown in. I set off with tyres that weren't too knobbly and carried some knobblies, thinking that the non-knobblies would wear out through Europe, and they didn't, and I kept using them for many countries. If you're doing that sort of trip, don't take tyres with you.
So you did take a tyre with you?
Yeah. I'd set off with Michelin Desert tyres. They're really hard wearing, really sort of knobbly. You can use them on the road, okay. Set off with Michelin Desert tyres and get a second set flown in or DHL'd in halfway round.
That's what you would do? Or?
Yeah.
But you took a set of tyres with you?
I was carrying a set of tyres for the first month or so, and I changed them before they were worn because it was just a ball ache.
So, and how worn were they when you changed them? Or were they not worn?
I think the first set weren't properly used up, and I think even Dan or Ed might have adopted one of them for the front wheel of their bike, actually.
Do you think you could have done the whole thing on that set?
No, the second set I had were sort of down to beyond the, I can't think of the word.
Down to the
legal limit.
So,
there was thread
mainly on the
showing.
back, obviously.
So you went through more on the back than on the front. But yeah, you don't need to carry them.
And how many other sort of people travelling did you meet?
I was going to ask that.
Like I say, I think there was 9 or 10.
47.
I think it was 9 or 10 doing it that year. I travelled with a couple called Dan and Lynn's, and actually Dan and I, this is different Dan and I run on, so Dan, Lynn's, Dan and Ed and I were all travelling together for a few days, and Dan and I were riding out front alongside, and we'd just got to a little village, having been off-road for a couple of days. We were riding along chatting, and he sort of disappeared down what I'd call a pothole, but a huge pothole, and buggered his arm. So he went to Clinic Gan Cami, and we ended up staying there for a couple of days and then left him to it. He'd broken his arm quite badly and took 6 or 8 weeks to heal. But then they tried to ride on, but again, it might have just been misfortune, but they weren't able to get into Congo, I think it was. So they ended up coming back. They didn't manage to get to South Africa.
Did you meet anyone in four-wheel drives or anything?
Yeah, so there was a guy, Mikey, who I still see quite regularly. He was travelling with another guy called Chris, and they travelled with a guy, I can't remember his name, but it was a Dutch guy, I think, Dutch or German, and he had an old sort of, the old Land Cruisers, the very square versions. He had one of them that was all sort of specced up with a kitchen in the back and stuff like that. They travelled with him for a long time. And there's a really interesting German guy called Christoph Bangert, and he was doing it in a Defender. And yeah, he was really interesting, a lot of stories to tell, and still leading an interesting life. He's a professional photographer, and he sends these emails around, and he's got the photo bus or something like that.
Right.
And he takes sort of, I think, disadvantaged people out and teaches them photography in the photo bus.
Brilliant. So do you think is there an overlander type, you think? A certain type of person, or does it take all sorts to make that world?
White, male, middle class. There is and there isn't. No, I think anyone can do it, and it's very cheesy to say that. Anyone can do it. And as I say, like Lynn's was there, so she was riding her own Suzuki DLZ. I think it's nice if couples want to do that. I think that's great. I haven't got first-hand advice, but mine would be take the same bike. Don't get like a huge bike for him and then a small bike for her. Like get the same bike. You've got the same parts. You can travel at the same speed. Just makes sense. But yeah, I'd like to say anyone can do it. I know everyone has the opportunity. Some people have a mortgage and 4 kids.
Take a loan,
kids.
turns out.
Yeah.
Take a loan.
Borrow some money, sack the kids up.
One of these special loans that just pays itself off.
Yeah. It shouldn't really work like that, but I'm not a financial expert, but I know that's not a very good idea. So are you still in touch with many of these people? Dan and Ed, obviously.
Yeah, Dan is getting married next month. Ed gave me a call last week. Mikey is going to come up in May, I think, end of May. He'd done Kilimanjaro and I did that last year, so I went for a few hikes with him. I was in London and he lives down south, so I met with him quite a bit before that.
But interestingly, quite a large proportion of this gang aren't fanatical motorcyclists, are they? They use motorcycles as a means to an end, and they got them help them facilitate this trip, but then they haven't pursued it particularly.
Mikey's still got a couple of bikes. He's got his BMW 1200 that he did his trip on, and he's got a KTM free ride that he doesn't use and he's trying to sell. Dan technically owns a bike, his TL, but it's been in the garage for 10 years and not run, so he's not really a motorbiker. I sold my 690 18 months ago. I
suppose Ed still races, doesn't he? But he doesn't use them to travel, certainly.
Right. So are many of these people serial overlanders or serial travellers, or...?
Probably. Dan and Ed, a couple of years later, went off and did a big Siberia trip. Their original Africa trip was Brighton to Cape Town, and I think that was a blog that I think is still up, so you can probably find a link to the Siberia trip.
It's from your website, actually.
I
didn't make a note of the URL for that.
They're definitely future podcast victims, I think.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, the comedy duo that is Dan and Ed, but nobody knows which one's which.
Right, so where do we get to? You get to the end? Are we jumping a lot of countries if we say, and then you just get to the end?
Probably. Yeah, there was 25 countries I went through in total, I think.
25?
Probably about 20 of them in Africa, or a few more.
So did you have a favourite country, or anywhere that particularly sticks in your mind?
Gabon was cool, just it felt quite chilled and relaxed and it was very equatorial and green, and I went off to try and see some monkeys of some sort, but they're not monkeys, you know what I mean. Gorillas.
Okay.
But they were closed for Christmas.
Gorillas closed for Christmas. Remember that if you go to the Gabon, the gorillas closed for Christmas.
I saw a huge lizard there. Like, it was over a metre long. Like, it was just like a crocodile sort of thing. And I rode past it and I pulled over and I thought it would have disappeared. And it was still there. So I went in my bag, got my camera out, and then it had gone.
Oh, yeah,
I swear I saw it. A huge lizard. Gabon was nice and chilled out. I really liked also sort of DRC and Congo, like the proper off-road stuff where like there was 4x4s that had been out overnight, and the way they were moving forward, because like the mud walls were like above the height of their car.
Yeah, the ruts are so deep that the whole truck
is below
is
ground.
inside the rut. Yeah.
And they would sort of use hammers to put a stake in the ground, and then they'd put the winch out to the stake and then winch the car forward. So like they were moving like 5-10 meters an hour or something.
And then you were riding through these.
Yeah, so that's the bit I thought was really cool. Like for mine, it wasn't so bad because I was lighter bike with soft luggage, but like Dan and Ed's, because they were heavier bikes, obviously better on road, but on the off-road stuff, we're taking their panniers off, walking them forward, dropping them off, walking back for the other pannier, and then going for the bike and sort of really having to manually push the bike.
So with some days where you would just make barely no progress?
There wasn't many days like that. Like there was a really cool section would just cross from Nigeria to Cameroon, Ekok to Mamfe, and that was like a notorious section that took like I think it was a couple of days, I can't remember, but I think it's been tarmac since. But there was that's not the majority of it. That was like a few days of it, but that was really cool stuff.
You had a few not run-ins, but you saw some fairly big wildlife as well. Obviously not gorillas, but
snakes, a few snakes. Like one I used to just add sort of Dan and they'd called it turtle shell. It was like one of these vests with body armor, yeah. And that's pretty much, I would wear that, a t-shirt and that. And I used to just, when we'd get somewhere, because I didn't have my bike's like saddle was like 10 centimeters wide, so I'd chuck it on the floor with my Camelback, and then when you come back you put it on, and I had my arm in it, and there was a snake, a sort of snake hanging down. So I managed to get it off, I chucked it down, and the snake went to the nearest cover, which was a tree, which is where Dan and Ed was sat. So I shouted to them and they moved, and it hid under a rock, and we got the cameras out. So then kicked the rock off and it started sliding towards Dan. Dan steps back, and so it shot away from the tree again to try and go away from us, went back into my body armor that I dropped on the ground. And in Oman, it was sort of a brownie coloured snake, and in Oman they were the harmless ones, so I didn't think it was dangerous. So like I had to then obviously shake out my body armor again, so disturbed it 3 times at this stage. And then when we saw the South Africans, they saw a picture and were like, oh, it's a black mamba, it's really fast and dangerous. I was like, it was really fast, yeah, but I thought they were winding me up because it wasn't black. And it turns out like a black mamba is because of its mouth or tongue or something.
So it's quite dangerous.
I think it was quite a dangerous snake that I was playing with.
But obviously not particularly aggressive, otherwise it would have...
Well, no, I think snakes are like that in general, aren't they? They try and hide you.
I don't know. I've avoided snakes most of my life. So didn't you swim in a river that was hippos and crocodiles, but you were in a cage, supposedly? In some place you'd stopped to campsite and they had a cage in the river, which meant you could swim in it, and the hippos and the crocodiles couldn't get to you.
Yeah,
and you trusted that.
I don't
remember
think
that bit. You should read your own blog. It's really good.
Jog my memory. I don't think I went in that cage. I think they had it.
Right, okay.
That was more Southern Africa, I think. It was a really cool place had these outdoor toilets that were all decorated up. So it was a bit touristy. So I think it might have been Namibia or somewhere.
The cage.
Yeah.
The toilets are more dangerous than the cage.
Oh, there was some horrible toilets somewhere. I think it was Senegal. It was Lac Rose. Yeah, they were covered in all these huge spiders and cockroaches and stuff. I'm pretty sure there's video of that on the website. Yeah. It was very Blair Witch toilets.
Yeah. So then there comes a point then when you leave Dan and Ed and you go back to riding solo again.
I did, but it was sort of, we'd been through the more dangerous stuff. Like we'd crossed from Angola into Namibia. I'm just trying to think if I got my geography right, but I think that's it. And then Ed was having trouble with his bike at the time, and also I think a bit of a deadline to get back to his missus, because you should ask him if you do get him on. Apparently he never told his girlfriend he was going away.
Wow.
She tells a great story. So ask him about that.
Save that.
Although they're still together.
Wow. That's impressive.
But he had to get back for work and to see her. And I wanted to go and see the Victoria Falls.
Yeah, I'll be back in 6 months.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to drop Ed in it. Apparently all this bike gear and stuff was turning up, And his girlfriend Liv was like, what's all this stuff coming? And he turned around and said, oh, haven't I told you? I'm going to Africa with Dan.
Excellent.
Role model.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I should do the same.
So you don't leave Dunedin until you're way down almost at South Africa then?
Yeah, the north of Namibia, so it was southern Africa. And it was like we had our first warm shower there in months. So, and you do get bits of touristy things going on. So yeah,
But you don't remember a strange moment where suddenly you were by yourself again?
I remember sort of where it was and saying goodbye and stuff, but it was always going to be that way. Like we didn't set off together, and we'd gone through, as I say, the dodgier stuff, and now we were just sort of. I was going to pot around, for want of a better word, and go see the Victoria Falls, and they just wanted back, so it wasn't.
So by the time you get down to South Africa, how long have you been away?
So I got to Cape Agulhas, which was the southernmost point in Africa. It's further south than Cape Town. 5 months to the day after I left Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And then I went and got drunk for 2 weeks in Cape Town. So it was, just over 5.5 months.
Did you know people in Cape Town?
Yeah, so Mikey and I were travelling together a bit after I'd left Dan and Ed. I bumped into him somewhere on the road, and we'd travelled together for a few days, gone to Sossusvlei, which is like these dunes in Namibia. I'd had to sort of stay behind to get a tyre shipped up because it was threadbare. So Mikey was a day or two ahead of me. And so I was at Cape Agulhas, and he rocked up and a load of champagne or something because he wanted to celebrate getting to Cape Agulhas just as I'd got there. Like he'd got there the day before and was coming back to celebrate. That was his excuse anyway.
Yeah.
So when you partner up with Dan and Ed, obviously you didn't know them before.
I'd met them once, but I didn't know
Right.
them.
Is there an element of awkwardness that I don't know how long you stayed together, but did you ever think, well, I'm kind of spoiling their thing?
I don't think so.
You mean it didn't occur to you?
That's certainly how they describe it.
But yeah, they kept getting up really early, but then I'd always hear the bike start.
And then it was always like moving towards their bikes in like a tiptoeing fashion. And then I'd wake up and then they'd just walk normally. It was the strangest thing.
Wait for me, guys. I'll be ready in a minute.
No.
We got on pretty well. We did have a few arguments on the road, but sometimes it's stressful. But in general, we got on fine. And I think it was definitely better for me to travel with people. I think they were quite happy to travel with someone else.
Yeah, I defy anyone to not get on with Dan and Ed.
They seem fairly good guys. Yeah. So we've done 1 hour and 6 minutes now, which is great. It's great. It's really good. Really good. I love the stories.
It's easy, isn't it?
It's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's easy for you sitting there while I carry all this gear around and set it all up.
Or you pull all these levers.
So I just made it work, but I thought we were getting to Brexit when you mentioned levers then, but you actually meant buttons and knobs and things.
Yeah.
Is there anything really cool that we've missed that we should...
Well, so you get to Cape Town.
Yeah.
And then how do you get the bike back?
Yeah, so Dan sort of did this for me, pretty much. He was organising to fly his bike back. I think it was Virgin.
But you had nothing arranged before you got there?
No. I mean, I was going to ride mine back in theory. We looked at, I think Dan had considered shipping. It was as cheap or cheaper to put it on a plane. And they were meant to be, it was a Virgin. It was meant to be, the bikes were meant to be on the same plane that we were getting. And it was costing about the same. I can't remember, like 500 quid to fly the bikes or something. Yeah. 500 quid for us. It's like another grand of my 6. The other grand went on visas. Yeah, they were meant to be on the same plane, but there was a problem with the paperwork. So it ended up being delayed 24 or 36 hours. So the idea was get off the plane in London, put the front wheel back on the bike because they're in a bit of a crate, and ride it home. It didn't quite happen in the end. I ended up hiring a van and went and picked it up.
And what sort of state was the bike in at the end?
It was probably buggered, but most of it taken.
Did it look just the same, or did it look?
It was dirty and stuff, obviously, but you could I'm sure you could wash it if you're that way inclined. When I was putting the bike on a crate, it was being sort of tied down with metal cable ties, basically. Yeah. And one of the guys in the hangar came along, and for whatever reason, I can't remember, he decided he wanted to unclip one side of it. So he got his bolt cutters, clipped one side of it open, so that side sprung up because it was all down, and it didn't have anywhere to go. It just sort of like got flung over, basically, because the other side was still ratcheted down and smashed into the floor. And so that probably buggered all the frame and stuff.
So you spend basically 5 months travelling on it, nothing significant, get home to Heathrow.
This was in South Africa, but yeah, it got buggered. But I had to bring it back again because this carnet, the tax document, otherwise you lose your money, I think.
Yeah. How long did you keep the bike after you got back?
It was in a shed for 6 months, and then, well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was in my mum's back garden under a motorbike cover for 6 or 12 months. Then Ed said, I'd quite like a 400. I said, well, come and take it then. So he borrowed it for a year, and it sat in his shed for most of that, I think, because he just bought a different bike. And in the end, it got sold to a guy on eBay for, I think I remember, 250 quid or 500 quid. Gosh. And he wanted the engine out of it to put on a different bike.
So I was going to say, I wonder if you sort of gave out the last 3 letters of that reg, where there's, still has it, but it all got...
Sounds like it's been crushed.
LGK, I want to say. Yeah. DX05.
That would be insane if any of our limited listeners.
Yeah.
Isn't it just Dan and Ed?
But you never thought,
do they listen? I don't know.
You never felt a great attack. You never thought, this is the bike I crossed Africa with. I must keep this bike.
No, I didn't feel sentimental like that. And I think Dan got rid of his bike after a year or so. Like I say, Mikey's still riding his BMW, but I think he was talking about getting rid of that last time. I don't know. It's just a bit of machinery.
Do you have any piece of kit that you took on this trip 10 years ago?
I sold a lot of it 18 months ago because I had a big clear out. I had still my Camel back. I've got the original tapes because, again, not having GoPros, they were digital cassette tapes. So I've got a huge box full of them. That's what was in my top box. It was full of my paperwork, passport, a video camera and tapes. So now you got a GoPro, you wouldn't need that top box.
So you've got 3 video cameras you got through.
I got three. I broke 2.
And so this was, what year was this again? This was
2007 to 2008.
How much sort of internet time did you spend?
It was an 04 bike, by the way. Internet time.
On the way down, was that?
Yeah, so we did do internet cafes. They were pretty crap and torturous. But again, when you're waiting for a visa, you go along for half a day and you sit there and you try and type up your blog or whatever.
Were you on Facebook or anything like that at the time?
Facebook was just coming out. I'm not sure if I did sign up for it. It wasn't really active. Right. I don't think I was posting stuff on there like you would nowadays.
After you'd done it, did you feel that was something that was out of your system? Or were you thinking, now I want to go and do...
I was envious when Dan and Ed went away, but I just knew at the time I was paying off my loan. I think I'd probably just finished paying it off and I wasn't ready to go. I was sort of doing a bit of career stuff and I was quite sailed up in Scotland. Yeah, I'd like to do another trip. I'd like to do some of South America, but it might just end up being in a car. And I rode to Greece, actually, a couple of years ago. I spent 6 weeks riding out to Greece. I worked there for a month or 2 and spent 3 weeks riding back. But it's not the same as Africa.
No, I thought that was really good. I was really glad when I read your blog this afternoon, and in some ways I didn't want to focus on the negative stuff, but there is the drunken immigration guy and the accidents, and they're the stories you tell, aren't they? Really?
Yeah.
But the thing is, you had 5 months and you had a great time. It's like 2 or 3 things were slightly.
Yeah. This is why when I'm on a trip and you stay somewhere that's really awful, I'm always thinking, this is the bit you're going to remember. You're not going to remember the nice hotel or the nice campsite. You're going to remember the grim campsite.
Stuff goes, yes.
You forget all the lovely campsites. You remember that French one where they bloody kept us up all night.
Oh, fuckers. I remember complaining in really bad French to the guy, and he didn't give a monkey's really. In fact, they put the barrier down because they thought we were going to ride off without paying.
Yeah. So you remember the bad bits or the challenging bits.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff, really.
They are the stories to tell, though, aren't they? But you're right. Yeah. It's interesting to tell them, but you don't want to. But you had, apart from those 3 or 4 days that were pretty bad or had bad bits in them.
Although it's quite funny, we're comparing a noisy campsite in France to 20 machete wielding youths. Not quite the same, is it, really? I quite like the idea of Africa, but it does sound. I don't know if it'd probably be outside my comfort zone.
But that's the thing, most days it wouldn't be. And you go knowing there's some risk. But like I say, the biggest one is probably the motorbike one, which you're already taking. And people will be friendlier than they would be in most places most of the time.
Well, it reminds me, 2 stories that 2 friends of mine told. One guy hitchhiked through Africa, did a very similar trip to yours. Yeah. And it was always a case of, what on earth are you doing hitchhiking here? It's really dangerous. Quick, get in. Yeah. Where are you going? I'll take you all the way. So it's, in some ways, it's the best place in the world to hitchhike. Another mate of mine, they had this, he'd instructed some general in the Pakistani army, had to pass his motorbike test in the UK, and he got quite friendly with this guy. And he said, "You got to come out to Pakistan." So two of my mates went out to Pakistan to ride the Karakum Highway, and he said, "Well, I'll just arrange it, and you can stay at all the forts, the armed stations on the border with Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is fairly tasty."
Yeah.
And in the end, this general rang up and said, "Well, maybe you shouldn't come. It's a little bit dangerous out here at the moment." And they just thought, "Well, we've done all this planning. We're going anyway." So they went anyway, and he said they've never been welcomed more warmly everywhere they went, because obviously people know this can be an inhospitable place. So they were just given such warmth and generosity everywhere they went.
Were people surprised to see you and hear where you'd come from?
Yeah, a little bit. So this is one of the things I do like telling is you'd go to obviously the petrol station when you see one, and there'd always be, like I say, people emerging. So there's a guy who'd turn up and he'd be like, "Oh, where have you come from?" And you'd sort of say where you came from that morning. You'd go, No, where have you come from? So you'd sort of say the country before. No, where did you start from? Like, "Oh, England." And then you go, "I don't believe you." And you go, "Okay." And he's like so disappointed and infuriated by that.
He seriously didn't believe you.
But he wants you to convince him that you have done it. But it's sort of like no skin off your nose. Like, he's asked where you come from. You said, "Oh, from England." And he doesn't believe you. And sort of it's like, okay, I'm just going to carry on filling my bike and get on with my day. But yeah, I always thought that was an interesting dynamic, which is they want you to convince them. And so then they sort of goad or dig a bit more and try and get you to convince them.
Yeah. And having done it, do you feel you were, I imagine you weren't really, but you didn't get to the end and think that you were quite naive about certain things when you set off, or did we?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's easy to look back and think we didn't have problems. Well, there was problems, but nothing material really, and we got through it okay, and so it's fine. I did take it seriously before I left. Like, I did have, I had a conversation with my mum about what would happen if I died. She brought it up, and
she brought that up.
Yeah, and she was like, "If we can get your body back, should it come to that, would you like to be buried or cremated and that sort of stuff?"
Yeah. Did you have a will before you set off?
I didn't have anything
Nothing
to leave. Otherwise, I would have done. Someone would have inherited 12 grand.
It was just a matter of the loan. Yeah,
that's an interesting conversation with your parents, though, isn't it? That's one I've not had with my kid.
Yeah, like I say, she brought it up, and then she knew I was going to do it, and hopefully it was just in case. Like, sorry, it's easy to say that again, a bit like the negatives, and to dwell on that, but sort of hopefully you're not expecting to not come back.
So were you calling home every few days? Or
no, actually, I had a sat phone, and I think I was one of the only people that did. I don't think anyone else did have one.
I bet you didn't even use it, did you?
I used it a couple of times just because I can't remember exactly how it worked, but I'd had to buy a fixed amount of minutes, say 100 minutes that I used for my trip. So I was getting towards the end of the trip.
You might as well use it.
Yeah.
Rather than your mobile
But even
phone.
then, trying to get signal sometimes was a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But I never used it. It's not like nowadays you have a phone in your pocket and you pull it out. Like,
this is before Deliveroo, so you wouldn't really.
Yeah.
See a lot of
well, that's the other story on that trip, on our tech trip, when we actually Deliverooed a pizza one night.
Did you?
Yeah. Some campsite in, I don't remember where we were, Holland.
Yeah.
And we got there quite late, and the bar had stopped serving food, so we just Joe delivered.
So the youngest one amongst us.
So the guy turns up on a motorbike to deliver pizza to you.
People on motorbikes.
Yeah. So do you think Dan and Ed would be up for doing this?
Yeah.
So they've got two trips, haven't they? They've got the same Africa trip. Be
Yeah.
interesting to get their view on.
Yeah.
So
On the same bits.
was Chris welcome or not? Did he overstay his welcome? And then the Siberia one, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I quite fancy that. Because there was the long way round, which was through Russia, wasn't it? And then the long way down was Africa. And I think that was a shadow of the long way round. Much better.
I got another story about Ed. Should I let him tell it himself?
No, you'll tell it in a more amusing way.
Yeah. Dan and Ed went to leave, and Ed had been converted by my sort of, what is it Lomax says about overweight is underprepared or something like that. So anyway, Ed had bought into my go small and light, and so they were doing this trip, and he bought a 250 or something for it, and he set off.
It was a WR, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And he set off
So this was the Siberia trip?
Yeah, this
right,
Siberia trip. The two of them set off, and they got like a few countries in, and Ed was like,
I think they almost got to Prague or something, didn't they? And then there was too much vibration on it, so he rode it back again.
So he turned around and he had two bikes because he wasn't sure between that and a DRZ, I think. So he was like, okay, I'm going to take the DRZ, which is what Dan was on.
400 rather than the 250.
400 Suzuki. Yeah.
So did he ride home and then ride
he
back on the
rode
400?
home, left on the 400, got to Paris or something, and decided actually WR was all right. And we turned around again, did some more modifications to his WR. I think put lead weights in the handles or something, and set off again.
Wow.
So where was Dan at this point?
He was just hanging around in
Just
Eastern
waiting.
Europe. He went doing some sightseeing.
You want sort of
I
like
think he
use
actually,
Dad's army credits. You want that to be sort of done with Ed going
genius.
backwards and forwards.
Can you imagine Greg on his little animated maps with his little wooden backwards and forwards like that's so funny. Awesome.
Great.
Are we done?
I think we might be now.
Let's go home.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.